Well, hello there. You come here often? Today I am making some Disney princesses, Disney princesses kind of, making them look sort of hipster. The plan I went with here was to actually not really do much with what they actually look like, and I instead just dressed them in the colours that they wear. So yeah, a lot of thought and effort really went into this video. But I'm probably not going to really talk about it too much because you can see it for yourself. There's not really much to say. But I was on the phone the other day, well, FaceTime with my sister. There's quite a big age gap between us. She's 11. And she was talking to me about The Sims because she plays The Sims as well. So we were on the phone for like 2 hours just like comparing the different packs and, what to get, what not to get. And it was kind of that moment that I thought, what has my life become? Because I'm having a conversation on a level with my 11-year-old sister. But I don't mind. It gives us something to talk about. As you can imagine, it's quite difficult to, have that much of a strong bond when there's such a big age gap. Because, I'm in my mid-20s, mid-20s, and she's obviously 11. So there's not really that much, we would have in common. So I actually quite like the fact that it gives us something to talk about, even if it is a bit lame on my side. But every time I talk to her, I kind of feel like, and everyone talks about this with kids, but I really do feel like, where has the time gone? Like, why are you growing up so quickly? Because I remember like it was yesterday when she was like 4. And I lived in the UK. I wanted to try and bond with her, so I used to take her on days out and things like that. But I remember she had this really annoying habit where I would say to her, okay, so tomorrow I'm going to pick you up and we're going to go bowling. And she would be like, oh, bowling? Oh, yeah. And then on the day, I'd go to pick her up, and then she'd get in the car, and as we were driving there, she would go, oh, I'm so excited for go to the circus. And then I would be like, we're not going to the circus, remember? We're going bowling. And she was like, oh, yeah, bowling, yeah. So then we'd do the bowling, get ready to go home, and then she'd be like, so when are we going to the circus? And I would be like, oh, for fuck's sake. So then another time I took her out, I said, right, we're going to the park tomorrow. We're having a picnic with my friend and her little girl. And my sister was like, oh, yeah, that will be nice. Yeah, go to the park. And I was like, yep, we're going to the park. Yeah. And then the day would come, I'd pick her up, and once again she'd be like, oh, I'm so excited for go to the museum. And I'd be like, where are you getting this from? We're not going to the museum, we're going to the park. And then she'd be like, oh, I thought we were going to the museum. Well, it turns out this park we went to just happened to have this like little boat museum there. So I was like, oh, okay, look, there's a museum. So I took her to the museum. She wasn't interested in anything. And then when we left, she sat on the floor and kind of was like bumping herself down the road. And I was like, what are you doing? And she looked at me and was like, why aren't I moving? Why aren't I sliding? And I was like, because you're not on a slide, you're on a wheelchair ramp. And I mean, to be fair, quite a lot of people that walked past were like, oh, isn't she sweet? And I remember thinking, yeah, you think she's sweet now. Wait until you try and plan something. It was literally every single time. And it didn't matter how many times I would say to her, we're going to this place. She would always come up with some ridiculous, like on the day, oh, I'm so excited for go to the pet shop. I mean, that was quite an easy one. We did just go to the pet shop, but it ended up costing me twice, every single time. So in the end, I didn't plan anything, and I just said, where would you like to go? And she was like, I want to go to the zoo. So we went to the zoo, and we had a lovely day. And that's kind of how I learned from now on. I'm just going to ask her on the day where she wants to go, and then we'll just go there. And it was a lovely day at the zoo. In the end, she went home with a little flamingo that she got at the gift shop. and she named it Giraffe. And I think Giraffe is still alive and kicking, still quite happy. Well, obviously not alive and kicking, it was never alive, but I think he's still living a happy life at her house. But yeah, even though I live quite far away, I do still try and make sure that we stay close. I always feel like I have more siblings than I do because I actually have one brother who's older than me and one sister who's much younger than me. But I've always felt like I've had more because my aunts and uncles, so I've mentioned before in other videos, all of my family live very close together. We're very close in general, but geographically as well, we're always within like a 5-minute walk from each other. So all of my aunts, all of my uncles, my grandparents, my parents, we all live in the same kind of area. And my nan was quite young when she had my mum, and she waited a while before she had her 3 other children. So there's like a 7-year age gap between my mum and her sister, who was closest to her in age. She's got 2 sisters and 1 brother, so I've got 2 aunts and an uncle on my mum's side. And because of the age difference, and my mum had my brother and I when she was quite young, it kind of meant that the age gap between some of her siblings and her and some of her siblings and me and my brother was kind of the same or less. So I always kind of felt like my aunts and uncles were more like siblings, which was a bit odd, but yeah, so we're quite, close in that sense. But I remember from stories that I've heard, because I was a bit too young to remember, but I kind of get the impression that my grandparents' house was like the place to be when my aunts and uncles were younger, because I hear all these stories about them bringing their friends round and doing all these things, and one story in particular really stood out to me because I thought it was fucking hilarious. So my uncle, when he was like 17 or 18, he and his mates were at my grandparents' house one evening, and they were just smoking weed in the living room, which most parents obviously would not allow. But my nan's always been, like, bless her, she's always been a little bit naive, and she did used to smoke, not weed, but she used to smoke menthol cigarettes back in the day. And so she was in the living room with my uncle and his friends, and she was like, "What is that smell? What smells so bad?" Because also I will just add that at this point it was like the 90s, and it was fairly common to smoke indoors anyway, so it wasn't really taboo at all that they were smoking in the house. But yeah, so my nan was like, "What's that smell?" And my uncle was like, "Oh, it's a special kind of cigarette." And my nan was like, "Oh, okay." And he was like, "Yeah, it's like a herbal cigarette. It's good for you. It's not filled with just tobacco. It's got, some healthy herbal stuff in it." And so my nan was like, "Oh, well, maybe I should try some then. That sounds good." So she had some, and she was like, "Oh yeah, this is good." She ended up smoking 2 spliffs on that evening. Still no idea that it was weed that she was smoking. And then, I think my uncle had a bit of a laugh with that. But I'm guessing it took a while to kick in, because apparently they were all woken up in the middle of the night by my nan frantically cleaning the house and hoovering the curtains. So I think it took a while to set in there, but it did eventually, and that's still a story we talk about at Christmas time. It's one of the classics that we talk about. Usually every Christmas we talk about some kind of story that embarrasses and humiliates all of us. And I have some treasures, but I don't really want to share them because they're about me, and some of them are pretty embarrassing. So I'd rather just embarrass my family, because they're never going to see this. So it's basically anonymous. But that's the thing that we do. We just really tear into each other every year. So that's one of her embarrassing stories, although I'm sure there are more. There just aren't any that spring to mind straight away. Bless her. If you do watch these videos, which I'm sure no one does, but if you do watch them, then you probably will know who it is that has the most embarrassing stories, and it's because he brings it on himself, and that would be my brother. He is the king of embarrassing stories, but I think he quite likes it. I think he enjoys putting himself in situations, because he's he loves funny stories, and he loves being able to tell funny stories, so he doesn't even mind if it's at his own expense. Anything's worth it for a laugh, you know, as far as we're concerned. So yeah, if you watch my channel, there's probably going to be a lot more about him, because I've always kind of maintained that you know, I don't think I would ever, you know, do anything like becoming a stand-up comedian or anything, but people have suggested it only when I talk about my brother. So if I ever did go down that route, I probably would be able to get somewhat success. If all I did was just talk about my brother, I could probably get some kind of career out of that. Who knows? Anyway, we're getting towards the end of the video now, just finishing off Merida, so I'll end it here and say thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, then please do feel free to like the video, more importantly subscribe. I mean, I'm more fussed about subscribers, but yeah, it would be gratefully received. Have a good day. Thanks very much. Bye.